I'm
Hello, and welcome everyone. How many people do we have online? 6 of us. Hello to my 6 friends. It's more than I usually expect. I would like to introduce you to. I used to have to pay people, now I don't, so that's a good start. Introduce you to Matthew. Matthew, I've known for quite some time, and are you he, him?
Yeah.
Yeah, your pronouns are he, him. And he has just started a podcast broadcast, which is really, really exciting. And his first podcast is a series about the infamous, mysterious Sommerton Man. So I'd like, Matthew, if you don't mind, just to tell us a little bit about yourself so we can get to know the person behind the microphone.
Yeah. So I live in Melbourne. I've lived in Melbourne for about a decade now. But I grew up in Adelaide. And my dad was an Oaklands Park local, so we grew up in and around Glenelg, Sommerton, all those areas. I also am a law student and a paralegal, and I'm obsessed with mysteries and basically I just love telling stories, and so it led me to the Sommerton Man pretty hands down, pretty unequivocally. I thought if I'm going to do a long form podcast, it's going to be on this one.
Awesome. That's fantastic. Yes. So what sparked your interest in the Sommerton Man in the first place?
So it started off with another podcast actually, called Case File. And their second episode ever, they've been going for about 5 or 6 years now, was on the Sommerton Man. And I loved the episode, and I realized that I knew all of those places. I knew the beach. I knew the areas that the host was talking about. And I realized that I'd actually known about the case since I was probably about 17 or 18. And because my dad, like I said, my dad grew up in that area. And so I read Jerry Feltus's book, The Unknown Man, and I was utterly hooked. I think since then I've been obsessed with it. It is such an incredible story. And I was finally kicked into doing the podcast when they announced that they were going to exhume his remains and try and find out through DNA who he might be. So yeah, it is.
Do you think they're going to have... Go on.
Sorry,
No, that's right. Go on.
If absolutely nothing else, it is a cracking story. Like, when I first heard about it, I didn't think it was real. I thought it was just an urban legend. I did not believe that this could happen. And my dad just, we would go for drives through Somerton Beach, and he'd like point out to me, no, that's actually where he was found. And I was like, oh shit, it actually is real, and it did happen. And it's just an incredible story, if nothing else.
Yes, I hadn't heard of the Sommerton Man until I found out that they were going to exhume his body. Another friend of mine is obsessed with the Sommerton Man as well, and she's up with all the conspiracy theories as well. And so I'm actually finding it interesting, and I'm looking forward to learning more about him through your podcast. And I know there's a couple of books out there about the Sommerton Man too that I might read.
There are a couple of books.
Yeah, so go on.
And you said you didn't really know about it. It's actually really interesting because most of the apart from the key players, so the people who were involved in the case, it's actually really not that well known in South Australia. I mean, maybe that's a generational thing. You know, it happened in the late 40s. A lot of people aren't around anymore. But most of the other podcasts that I've listened to on this case have come from other countries. You know, America, Britain. There was an Irish podcast that did an episode on the Sommerton Man, and a lot of the sort of notoriety that this case has gotten has come from outside where it happened. It's quite strange.
Yeah, I wonder why that is. What's so could become? I mean, South Australia is known for its serial killers. You know, you've got more chance of being killed by a serial killer than anything else. And you know, we've got the Beaumont children, we've got Louise Bell, we've got the family murders, we've got the bodies in the barrel, we've got the other ones up north, and I can't remember the name. And yeah, and then of all those amazing stories to tell, they pick up on this one man that seems to have been, well, up until now, seems to have been forgotten.
I think there's a whole lot, when you dig into the story, there's a whole lot of really sort of, I guess, I don't know, I'm trying to find a better word for it, cinematic elements to the story, like just things that tend to lend itself to really good storytelling. You know, the luggage, the fact that body has any freaking clue. They know I'm recording and send me a message. Go away. That nobody had any clue who this person was. The Rubaiyat, the book of poetry, the weird code that was written on it. It's just very, I think, what generates interest is the fact that it's a very, very strange story. It's a very interesting story. And I think that and just the fact that it's still unsolved. You know, for me, it was mostly what drew me to it was the idea that it's still unsolved. And that I think we might have to get comfortable with the fact that we may never know who this person is. And then we've got the added element of, did he have a kid? Why did this woman who clearly knew him pretend she didn't know him? There's just all the threads make it just a cracking story.
Yeah, absolutely. That's fantastic. Oh, sorry, I was just looking at the time. I've lost train of thought.
And originally I was thinking so originally when I was trying, because I wanted to do a long form podcast about a South Australian case, because that's where I'm from. And I was originally it wasn't going to be the Summerton Man. It was going to be the Beaumont children. I was originally to the Beaumont children, and when it was really only the exhumation that made me think, oh man, I've got to get this out there. Like more people have got to know about this.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, because the Beaumont children is also a really cracking, terrible story. How these kids can just turn, just go somewhere and never come home. And that's also one that my family is sort of connected to, because my dad was the same age as the youngest Beaumont child, and he grew up around those beaches, and so yeah, it was originally going to be that, but I changed my mind because I was like, oh wow, this could be solved. We don't know. And
for sure. Yes,
and,
yeah.
I don't
Keep
know
going.
if you've heard any interviews with Professor Derek Abbott. He's an incredible man, and it's really been him that's pushed this forward, and he's the one that's pushed Vicky Chapman, the Attorney General, into exhuming remains, because ultimately it was up to her at the time to decide, and she decided to do it.
Oh, that's awesome. So I was wondering, like, now, so you've created your first podcast series about the Summerton, or you're creating your first podcast series about the Summerton Man. Summerton Man, yes, sorry. I don't know, I'm all of a sudden very nervous. I don't know why. I've never been nervous on a live before. So what came first? What came first? Did you have the idea of doing a podcast before you chose the Summerton Man, or did you choose the Summerton Man and then decide, I'm going to do a podcast?
Whoa, it's a little bit of both.
Like the chicken and the egg.
Yeah, it's a little bit of column A, a little bit of column B. Like I said, I listen to a shitload of true crime podcasts. Like, I love them. And podcasting's, because originally, if I wasn't intending to do, like I said, I wasn't intending to do a podcast on the Sommerton Man at all. But podcasting is really having its moment. And I did sort of have a think about the format that I wanted to use to tell the story. So yeah, I did think about potentially, because I have a background in sound and audio production, but also in filmmaking as well. So I did think, why don't I try and go to South Australia and make, because there've been a lot of shorter documentaries and sort of interviews, but no actual docu-series about the Summerton Man. And then I sort of, I was thinking about it, thinking, and it's actually incredibly expensive to make a documentary film. And then I started listening to podcasts, and I'm like, aha, this is it. This is how I'm going to tell the story, because podcasts are, you don't have to go to a cinema to listen to them. You can pick up your phone or your device, open your podcast player, and there it is. And that's how I tell the story. And that's how I wanted to tell the story, I think, after a while, yeah.
Excellent. That's amazing. So how many episodes in this series have you planned on?
So we've got six planned, and then possibly another 2 or 3 sort of bonus shorter episodes. I'm hoping, fingers crossed, he's a very busy man, to interview Derek Abbott at some point, just depending on how busy he is and how COVID happens, and all the particulars. But 6 main episodes, and yeah, potentially 2 or 3 bonus episodes. But if this story has life in itself, I'll keep talking about it. I'll keep doing it.
Awesome. Fantastic. And wouldn't you know that I just happened to have a snippet of your first introduction podcast. And I've put pictures to it so that people can watch and maybe get an idea of what you're talking about while we're playing it. So this is a shortened down version of the intro. Is it podcast number 1, the intro podcast, which I will play now. My apologies for the quality of sound. I had to record off another recording. So the sound is all right, but I do apologise if it's not the best. So let me go on a Southern Beach promo. Here we go. And check this out if you haven't already seen it. And we'll start talking about maybe what's to come after we've got. Actually, I'm going to tell you what I like about this. That's what I'm going to critique this and tell you what I like about it. Here we go.
Wait.
He was found with a cigarette gently resting on an almost spotless suit. It looked like he was sleeping, a traveller perhaps, possibly even an alcoholic recovering from a bender. But when he was approached by a man on his morning swim, it became clear the unknown man was dead. My name is Matthew Oakley, and this is On a Southern Beach, the mysterious case of the Sommerton Man, the debut podcast from Oak Tree Productions, Melbourne. On a southern beach takes a look at some of the events leading up to the death of the Sommerton Man, and of course, that fateful day almost 73 years ago. Episode 1. Setting the Scene. The story of the Sommerton Man has become well known, with many keen podcasters, readers and historians alike knowing the events of that fateful day, December 1st, 1948. However, let's spend a little time this episode setting the scene for what is to become. What was Adelaide like in the last years of the 1940s? For those of you that know Adelaide, it is one of the hottest and driest capital cities in the Southern Hemisphere. The day the Sommerton Man was found would have marked the long hot season's beginnings. The beaches were starting to fill with swimmers morning and evening, and it was approaching the holiday season with Christmas just a few weeks away. Benjamin Chifley had become Prime Minister in 1945, and with a quietly growing middle class, life had just begun to return to normal after the horrible events of World War II. Sailors poured in off the docks at Port Adelaide looking to reignite lost loves, and returned servicemen began to deal with readjusting to life in civilian clothing. My own grandfather Jack was one of them, and though never speaking about the time he served, was said to have returned from Darwin weary, and although young, irrevocably changed. Having enjoyed freedoms previously unknown to them, women returned to the homes, starting families with returned spouses or finally marrying their wartime beaux. For one woman in particular, who we'll come to know in later episodes, the war created secrets she would take to her grave. You went shopping in John Martin's or Harris Scarf, and if you were lucky, you went to the Regent Cinema on Saturdays. Your dad, if he didn't serve, most likely worked industrially or in one of the few office buildings scattered around the city. Schools were a primarily suburban affair, with primary schools, high schools and technical colleges throughout. The University of Adelaide, one of Australia's oldest educational institutions, hosted students from regional and metropolitan areas, and some interstaters too. Post-war migration had just started to occur, with immigrants from war-torn Europe seeking a better life in Australia. Italians, Greeks, and even people from Britain settled in Adelaide and became part of the city's vibrant cultural fabric. In the autumn of 1948, a gale-force wind ripped through Adelaide, uprooting trees and causing boats to lose their mooring in the Port River, including the HMAS Barcoo, which was, according to historian Amy Painter, relentlessly pushed towards Glenelg Beach and dangerously encroaching on land. By December of that year, the damage had only just begun to be repaired, with many of the harbour suburbs continuing to suffer from lost business for seasons to come. When not beset by weather, the beaches of Adelaide were always a sight of fun. Children flocked to them after school or on weekends, eating ice cream with a very rare soft drink. My grandfather told me that there was often fish and chip shops where the chips were wrapped in newspaper, and if you took too long to eat the chips, the ink would rub off on your fingers. Sommerton Beach is situated in the southern suburb of Sommerton, between the beachside suburbs of Brighton and Glenelg. Each of these places was situated a short distance from the city centre, in what has become known now as the 20-minute city. The streets were lined with bus routes, linking up the beach suburbs as they went, and that is why, as we came to know, the Sommerton Man had in his possession a ticket from Henley to the old suburb of St Leonard's, one suburb over from Sommerton. After drinking at nearby pubs, the beaches were often a safe place to rest for the evening, or to spend your nights curled up in the arms of a lover. Much to the chagrin of the police at the time, it was not uncommon for driftwood to be used to burn fires as the evenings turned chilly, and bonfires were said to be a regular occurrence. After the summer, the students gradually returned to schools, and life became startlingly normal. Adelaide was on its way to becoming a cosmopolitan capital city with opportunities for everybody who went there. Between schools, churches, sprawling beaches and culture, how did this one man come to his final resting place, alone, on a southern beach?
Wow, that was pretty
They
fantastic.
such. I will have to talk to you off air about where you got those pictures from. Some of them they are so cool. They are
Aren't
so
they?
cool.
Aren't they?
Yeah, and
All I did was Google search, Google images. That was it. I've probably breached a number of copyrights.
oh, there's an enormous amount of grey. I mean, yeah, there's an enormous amount of area about copyright in this case because some things are in copyright, which means you can't use them. Some of them are Creative Commons, which means you can go for your life. And it's but I think the whole thing is as long as none of us are making money, which I'm not sure who makes money off podcasting these days. But no, there's
It's the dream. It's the Australian dream.
yeah. I listen to a British podcast that's basically they're now the most listened to British podcast in Britain, and
Mhm.
they started in a closet. They accidentally got locked in a downstairs closet because they heard that you had to record in a small space, right? And now they're the most listened to podcast in Britain. So I don't know, man. Things are possible,
You
but
never know
yeah.
anything's possible. What I loved about that, it was so easy to find pictures. I actually did that in the spur of the moment, and it only took me about an hour. And it was so easy to find pictures to match because your commentary, your description, your in-depth into what Adelaide was like in the 1940s, it was just so easy to find. It was just just one word. I can pick up on a word and just match that word to that picture. You did an amazing job with that podcast, really setting the
Yeah.
scene, and you went
Yeah.
into enough detail without being too over the top.
Yeah, that first episode, I intended to be quite short. I did intend it to be quite short because I really wanted to just introduce the the Adelaide that probably not. I mean, myself included. I have grandparents that lived in that Adelaide, but my dad was born in the 50s, so he didn't really grow up in that Adelaide. He grew up in the Adelaide of the 50s and 60s. But I
Mm.
really wanted to set the scene, as I said, for, I guess, just what struck me when I was researching it was just how normal, just how everyone was returning to this kind of life after the war. And it just all seemed so utterly normal again, And so how did in the space of maybe a few short months it something like this happened, and it became like Adelaide became the center of like a really really baffling story, but it just how normal the place was really struck me. Just how everyone went to work, everyone went to the beach, everyone went to John Martin's, but it was very easy to find information. So I actually did intend to be quite short, but I think my first draft was well over 45 minutes long, and I'm like, I don't need to be this long.
Yeah, I cut out a few tiny. That was pretty much most of the podcast. I just cut out a few tiny bits out of it.
Mm,
Um,
mm, mm.
and it
Yeah,
was difficult to find out what to cut out because it was also relevant. It was also interesting, and I wanted to leave it all on there, but I didn't. It was too long. You can only upload a certain size, and I spent
right.
more time compressing the files than I spent
Oh,
editing the files.
editing just anybody that tells you that podcasting is glamorous has never had to sit there and listen to the sound of their own voice for
Hmm.
about hours on end. Because the first 3 episodes, just to give you a little insight into my editing process, were all recorded, written in the space of about a week, recorded and edited in the same day. So I've been, I spent about 6 or 7 hours just recording everything at once so that I could work on distributing and editing and getting it up to standard. But yeah, no, I really wanted the first episode to be a scene setter, just to give you a little bit of an insight into what Adelaide was like then. One of the things I did mention, but I didn't end up including, was that Adelaide was a major port city. So there was a lot of sailors that were coming in off the docks. There were a lot of people coming in from places like Radium Hill and Warmura, and and that really sort of just made me think a little bit about the next episode.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, just to chime in, Warmura is north of South Australia, and it was a huge American army base.
A massive American army base. Uncle was
Yes.
actually lived there in. He actually lived there in the 90s when he was still an army trainer, and so it was in commission as recently as the early 90s. Yeah, it's been decommissioned as a base now, I believe. I could be wrong, but yeah, it was in commission as an army base, I think, from the Second World War right up until as far as I remember, the early 90s. Yeah.
Yes, because I taught up at Warmura for a term or two, and it wasn't an army base then, and it was back to being a small, very small town, with half the town being. Actually, I'd like to go back there and do some urban exploring there. Half the hotels were boarded up. You know, a shopping street rather than a town, and it had the state of the art, absolutely everything. It was better equipped. A small town like Warmura was better equipped with the state of the art everything than Adelaide as a major capital city had. So the Americans spent millions of dollars, I suppose, for their own army people to live quite well in the desert.
Yeah. I think it was because it was in the desert. It was also part of the space race. It was a rocket launching facility at one point as well. Yeah.
Yes.
And so
and there are memorials there to the US Army as well, and what was going on up there. That sounded horrible. What it was, there was nothing untoward going up there. Believe me. At least I don't think there was.
Theories that the Sommerton Man was an American who was stationed at Warmura, and he contracted some sort of uranium poisoning sort of issue, and traveled to Adelaide to find his potential child, and ended up passing away from uranium poisoning. I don't know what I think about that. I don't know what
I don't know. I haven't heard all the stories. The only story I've heard was that he was killed because he was a spy. So I'll have to read up more about that. As I said, I really don't know much about him, and I'm so. I guess I should have done more research when talking to you. But let's go to episode 2. Now, I've been privileged enough to listen to a draft of episode 2, but I'm not going to give anything away. I'm going to let Matthew talk about whatever he would like to talk about from episode 2.
Episode 2, we get good segue, Matt. Episode 2 there's a bit of a dual focus going on. So in the beginning part of the episode, I talk about, okay, so what were the politics going on around the time the Sommerton Man was found? What led a lot of people to think that he could have been a spy? And so I talk about, I call him my bestie, even though he's, I talk about the government of Ben Chifley, and how he, up until his government was elected, there wasn't really much worry about communism in Australia. There wasn't a whole lot of, we've been sheltered from the Red Scare in Europe pretty profoundly. But because of this little thing called the ANZUS Treaty, which bound the Australian, New Zealand, and American militaries together after the war. When the Americans came to Chifley and said, "Hey, we got an issue with some spies. How about helping us out with that?" He became part of the decryption program and Operation Venona, which is probably best known for leading to the arrest and execution of Julius and Ethel Rosenberg. And it was basically passed on to Mr. Chifley that there were Russian spies operating in Australia, and that a Communist Party of Australia official was potentially part of that. So he started the Australian Securities and Intelligence Office, also known as ASIO, as a result. And so it was after the establishment of ASIO that we really started to get into this idea that there were spies pretty much everywhere. And this all led into the idea that this man could have been a Russian spy. Still to this day, there's nothing definitively linking him to being a spy. There was a man that suffered a similar death to him. His name was George Marshall in 1945, but there was really nothing definitive, nothing at all. And I talk in the second episode, I talk about how this whole thing with Chifley got people really thinking and wound up about communism. And got people thinking about spies, got people thinking about, surveilling each other. And it was the way in which that happened. Probably if it hadn't been the case, I don't think that everybody would have leapt to this idea that the Sommerton Man was a spy. That is a very poor explanation. But it's just kind of like, you're going to have to listen to the episode to get a better one, I think.
Yeah, no, that's okay. And we will, don't you worry. I encourage everyone to check out the episode. Because I think back then there was a communist feeling in or division in the Labor Party, wasn't there at the time?
Yeah, so originally Chifley he called for, at the end of the Second World War, he called for cooperation between the US, Russia, and Australia. He was a huge supporter of Malaya, who had just won their independence and were travelling towards sort of more socialist sort of policies. But he was also a Catholic. And so what happened was the Catholic movement was established. And the Catholic movement and they still exist in the ALP today, a sort of centre-right grouping of religious, Catholic people who were designed to sort of get rid of the left-wing influence in the trade unions and in, the party itself. So yeah, there totally was, and that just sort of created division and suspicion everywhere.
You've got a wonderful compliment here. I think Matthew Oakley has chose the right profession, considering he hasn't stopped talking. Glad he found what he loves. And I know he means that in the criticism, means that in the best way possible. That's great to have a guest talk.
Oh, I'm very good at it, particularly when it's something I love talking about. I'll talk all day about it, really.
In actual fact, we almost started late because we were chatting before the... I had to cut him off mid-sentence to say, hey, we've got to start. Save it up for the hour we've got.
I haven't seen a person for about 3 years or something ridiculous like that because of COVID. So I'm just like...
So are you planning on coming to Adelaide at all? Like under ideal circumstances, is there any?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. I do intend to do a bit of on-location shooting in and around the Summerton areas. If COVID permitting, really.
Yeah, COVID sucks. Well, I tell you what, I'd love to be there if you do.
Yeah, but I do plan to be. It's just about whether I'm allowed to be or not, really.
Yeah, I know.
Given that my state's just entered its 6th lockdown, it's not looking likely. But if there are ideal circumstances, yeah, totally.
Yes, I think everyone's it's probably the wrong time to be doing a live cast when everyone's going in and out of lockdown
Yeah,
every single day.
yeah.
Yes. But never mind, we're here now. And Matthew, you are an absolute delight to have. Now we've got, what are the other theories that people have come up with that the Summerton Man passed away or died of or was killed?
There's so many. One of them with I'll tell you what I think. Don't think he was a spy. I just don't think there's enough evidence. I think there's way too many conspiracy theories, and there's just nothing to suggest that was the case. I think and I go on to talk about this in a later episode of the podcast. I think that he was a former lover of Jessica, also known as Jo Thompson. She's gone by a few names in the past, and he had fathered her son, Robin. Because if you look at a picture of the Sommerton Man and you look at a picture of Robin Thompson, it's uncanny. And it is so unlikely that same ears, same teeth, same legs, and not be related. I think that he never knew who his father was. And I think that he had gone to see Jessica and she had not let him see her. And either known that he was going to die of a chronic illness, a terminal illness, and wanted to see his kid for the last time and passed away on the beach, or he passed away before he could get to her. So, yeah, I think that he was a very lonely dad and that he was trying to see his son with the knowledge that he may die. And
wow.
Yeah.
That's
So
pretty out there. Yeah.
it's so sad. And then there's this whole idea of what did Mrs. Thompson, if anything, have to do with his death? Because there were theories for a very long time. I don't know if I believe them or not. I haven't done enough research yet. That she didn't want her partner who went on to step parent Robin to know that she'd had this affair and that she had in murdering him. But I do think that his death was either from an unrelated sort of poisoning incident, because keep in mind that he may have come into contact with uranium in Theberton, because there was uranium kept underground in Theberton. If he had been into the western suburbs at all, would have come in contact.
That's interesting.
Yeah. Or he had a genetic illness that he couldn't have been detected in 1948 that he passed on to Robin and that he died from. But I believe, because at heart I am a very sappy romantic, I do believe that it was a bit of an unrequited love story rather than a spy story. Yeah, that's what I think happened to him. But
it's interesting. Yeah.
I like, with everything with this case, the more you read, the more you research, the more you get into the story, the less you know about it. The less you can definitively say, yeah, this happened. This is what happened. This is how oh, no, it's not. Oh, maybe not. Like, it's one of those stories.
Oh my goodness! Wow, that's that's definitely a murder mystery in the making, isn't it? Like, for TV.
It potentially is. Like, we don't know, and because one of the things I was saying to you off air was everyone's dead. Joe, Joe died in 2007. Robin died in the 80s. The only people left to really put the pieces together are Rachel, who is Robin's daughter, Rachel Egan, and Derek Abbott. They're the only people left that could potentially be able to establish the connection and solve the story. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because the police didn't, was it Joe? But the police didn't question Joe that hard, did they? They just went to a house,
No.
had a quick
So
chat, and
they showed, so a bust was made, a plaster cast was made of his sort of profile, so his head and shoulders, in an attempt that was going to be shown to the public in the hope that someone might know who he was. And they showed it to Joe, and she looked, I was trying to remember the quote that I read. She looked pale, like she went white. And then she said, "Oh no, I don't know him. I don't know him." And then she left, and she never spoke. But she spoke to Jerry Feltus a little bit, but then she never spoke of it. Never ever said another word about it. So they do believe that she knew who he was, but they could never get it out of her, never talk about it to her.
And they did, yes, and the police didn't question her like they would question others.
No.
That's very interesting. Very, very interesting. Yeah. So does anybody have any questions? We've got about 15 minutes left. I've got a live starting at 11:45. Not a live, a premiere starting at 11:45. So does anybody have any questions? So I do apologise for ignoring the chat. I haven't ignored it. I just can't read it because I'm too far away. I'm really, really blind. Unless I'm up like this, I can't see. So does anybody have any questions that they want to ask Matthew?
I was just seeing if I could see the chat, but I can't see it either, so it's fine.
You should be able to, if you go up to comments in StreamYard.
Yep.
You're on a computer. You should be able to see it.
Yep.
Heather, we are all good. Hang on. Pocket Watch has one. Question. So why the code? Did the secret lovers have their own special code they communicated with?
Yeah. No one's been able to figure out. Look, okay, so this is one of the sticky things about this case. No one's been able to figure out, even if it was a code, or no one's been able to figure out what it is, or if it was a code, if it was anything to do with, where he was going, who he was, whatever. No one's been able to figure it out. I tend to agree that it was a way that Jessica and the Sommerton Man, or Joe and the Sommerton Man, were communicating with each other. I agree with that, but it's one of the great unknowns about this case, and it really does depend on who you ask. You can ask Detective Jerry Feltus; he'll say that there was no code, that it was just random writing. You can ask Derek Abbott, and he'll tell you that it was a code that Joe, Jessica, she went by numerous names, and the Sommerton Man communicated with. I think it was a way that he was communicating with her. But I'm once again, I preface this by saying no one really knows. No one really knows. There are theories. Yes, that's true. Yeah, that's true. The autopsy will bring light on whether he had a terminal illness. Absolutely. It will also, there were a lot of illnesses that we know about now that we didn't know in 1948 and 1950. So yeah, I do agree with that entirely. The exhumation will be able to determine, if anything, what he died from.
Yeah, that's awesome. Any other questions, or I'll have to think of one? And that could be quite awkward, could lead to a dramatic pause. which won't be quite as dramatic as awkward. I did have a few, but every time I think of one, something else pops up and I get distracted. So where are you? Now, I've got links to Matthew's stuff in the description below. So where can they find your podcast and email address and any other useful information?
Podcasts at the moment. I'm on Spotify, which is it's a possibility. It's a possibility. Do you mean Rachel?
Yeah, I think she means Joe's daughters. I think Pocket Watch means Joe's child.
Yeah, child. It's a possibility. There is a possibility. I think if it were the case, they probably would have been found by now. I'm really not sure. It's a possibility, but I do think that they really wanted to protect. Jerry Feltus has said that his biggest thing about this case has been protecting Jo, has been keeping her out of the media spotlight. So we really don't know much about her. All we know is that she was a nurse who trained in Sydney and settled in Adelaide with a kid. That's literally it. So whether her daughters or granddaughters have possession of communications between the two of them, we don't know. And Detective Feltus hasn't really been forthcoming about that. So, yeah. How come they haven't done it yet? They've dug up his body. According to the Attorney General, COVID. It's been massively delayed by COVID. There are a lot of things that they can't do if there's the presence of the virus. And exhumations of 73-year-old bodies, DNA testing of 73-year-old bodies takes a really, really long time. I definitely recommend listening to Derek Abbott talk about what that process will be, because the actual DNA testing is happening now, but it's been massively delayed because of COVID.
Everything's been delayed because of COVID. Now this is a random one.
Okay. Jesus, I don't.
It's still very pertinent. We like you on account of your pie tastes.
That's a big question. Probably I would. I make a really good vegetarian shepherd's, so I'm gonna go that one. I think. Oh no, I have to. I'm not gonna say a pasty. I'm definitely gonna say a pie because it's so funny that there's this massive timeline of the Sommerton Man case that the University of Adelaide did, and at one point there's this little segment of like, at some point he ate a pasty because that was what was found in his stomach, and I'm just like, what?
I know. Well, that's a great Australian, British-born Australian tradition as the pasty. Yeah. If those who are not from England or Australia want to come to Australia, you have to have a pasty and a pie floater.
It's a very uniquely South Australian thing as well, the pasty.
Yes.
I haven't been able to get anything in Victoria that's quite the same. Yeah. But pies, definitely my own vegetarian shepherd's probably my favorite. It's pretty much the only one I eat, so I didn't know if this just meant savory or sweet or I don't know. Yeah. I don't really eat pies,
Nicole, if you go to my Exploring Borough Part 2, you'll see me eating a pasty, a Cornish pasty.
Yeah.
It's a pastry. It's meat and vegetables wrapped in a short crust pastry.
Basically,
it must be lunchtime in the other side of the world or dinner time. Everyone's hungry. Talking about food. Okay, Pocket Watch. In actual fact, I did try to do an investigation at Somerton Beach last week. It was Tuesday night. It was fine up this way, up at Windsor Gardens, and we got to Sommerton, and it was cold, and it was wet, and there were puddles everywhere. And I said,
Yeah.
bugger it. We're going back in the car. We even got out of the car and walked down the steps near where the Sommerton Man was found. And I'm not going any further because it's all slush and it's cold and I'm wet and I'm tired. And we got in the car and went to a cemetery in the northern suburbs instead.
Yeah.
Just for a little fun.
It would be really interesting, though, to go back because in December, he was found in beginning of December. Yeah, 1st of December. They reckon he passed away sometime the night before. It'd actually be really interesting to go back in summer around the actual time and look then, I reckon, in around the actual sort of yes.
Yeah. I do what's known as public investigations, where I invite local Adelaideans to join me in a paranormal investigation if they want to. It's a way of having a look and seeing it for free without having to pay anyone. So yeah, I might actually just do that. I'll do a private one and a public one, and maybe if Matthew comes to Adelaide, we can do one with Matthew as well. He can include it in his podcast.
Yeah.
Wouldn't that be awesome?
That's what I was planning to do anyway. I was planning to do a much shorter episode, so maybe about 20 or 30 minutes long, of just what I had planned to do was retrace to get the 1948 map and just basically go the way that he would have gone. So from Elg to Sommerton and like end up where he was found. Because I'm really curious to know I'm really fascinated to know how much of that journey can be recreated now because of just the passage of time and all the absolute development that has taken place over there since the intervening 70 years. Yeah. But yeah, that was something I'd always planned.
Yeah. Oh, here's a long one. Okay, how can I let...
Look, there's a lot of American food that I don't really know if you all can call it food, really. But so yeah,
I've been to America. I've tried American food. It's only hamburgers, hot dogs, and sandwiches, which is really hamburgers with a different name, and
really
Mexican.
Know what's in hot dog? I just don't. I lived in New York for a little while when I was in my my late teens, early 20s, and yeah, there were literally hot dog stands all over the place, and I was just like never ever game to eat from a hot dog stand ever.
Oh, I do all the time. I like the fact they were only $2. It was cheap for me to survive on a hot dog, and like one of my dreams was to have a hot dog in Central Park, so I managed to fulfil that bucket list.
Yeah, that's cute.
American food is called garbage.
It really is.
Oh,
like,
dear.
Sorry, now no American. I've just lost all my American listeners. I've just insulted them.
I know, so do I, mate. A lot of my viewers are American too. My apologies. It's really not that bad.
No, I just love to. I watch a show. I've just finished watching a show called Mr. In Between, which I adored. It was made by the Edgerton brothers, and the main character loves dim sims, right? That's his favorite food. And this show, Mr. In Between, was actually bigger in America than it was in Australia. More Americans watched it than Australians did. And every time I log on to the Facebook group, there is at least one American going, "What's a dimmy?" What's it? It's dimmies nonstop. And so dimmies, pies, the whole lot. Yeah, it's just what Australians eat, I suppose.
Yeah. Sorry, I wasn't concentrating then for that last moment. Let's have a look at another comment. I am from the States. You can't lie.
Yeah, you go.
Oh, hang on. Now, where did the word thong come? Actually, Nicole said something. Was that Nicole's question I was answered? Everything is deep fried in the USA. I just watched a
Yeah.
video of deep fried yes. Here in Canada, our cheese curds are naked. The Indiana State Fair, they had you could get deep fried Mars bars.
Which they
That
stole from the Scottish. The Scottish pioneered the
oh,
fried Mars bar. Yeah, oh yeah. There's some little fish and chip shops in Glasgow that are like, that basically they became famous for deep frying Mars bars. Yeah, that is definitely a Scottish thing they've just stolen.
okay. Well, there you go. There you go. Question. On the retracing of Sommerton Man movements, did his love interest live not far from the Sommerton beach? Oh, intrigue and mystery.
Yes, she did. It was the address that was found with the code and the copy of the Rubaiyat was some 500, less than a kilometre away was the address. Yeah. So that's what gave rise to the theory that he'd either been there or was on his way.
Maybe a quick walk along the beach before he went to visit.
Less than a kilometre. So only maybe 400 or 500 metres away. Yeah.
Wow. There you go. It just adds to the mystery.
It's so fascinating. But yes.
Yes, well, there you go. Well, it's 11:28. If there are any more questions, so you were talking about where we can find you and how we can get in contact with you, your Facebook page and all that. That's all in the description. So do you want to quickly go through that again, Matthew, for us?
Yeah. So I'm on Instagram and Twitter. My Twitter is under construction at the moment, but yep, up and running next couple of days. At Southern Beach Pod, all one word. And yeah, on the 27th of this coming month, we'll launch our Patreon page, so you can sign up and get some extra shit.
I should have done this before. After you did your Patreon. So that we could all have a look at it. So I've got all the information now pinned to the top of the chat. So I've got a link to the first episode, a link to the email address, to Instagram, and Facebook. So you can join Matthew on Facebook, Insta, and all that. And I'm sure he'd love to get to know you all a little bit better, or have a chat to you if you want.
Primarily on Insta at the moment. There'll be links to all the episodes as they're distributed. And I'm working on got a web design. We'll have a spiffy new website very soon as well. All the podcast process feed episodes, individual episodes, bonus stuff, images are all primarily on Instagram at the moment, so you can find what you're looking for on Insta.
Absolutely.
I actually can't do that at the moment because I have used some audio. I tried to put my first episode up on YouTube and it was taken down in about 10 seconds. I have used some audio that I have got only certain distributive rights for, and YouTube doesn't really like that. So I will definitely, if I'm able to record alternate versions of those episodes, master them and put them out without that audio, definitely just going to bung them all onto YouTube at some point. Yeah.
Or even use an editing program to get somebody else to do the speech and just add a few effects to make it sound like it.
Also, I've bought certain audio that can only
Right.
be used in certain situations, and
Oh, okay. Yeah, yeah.
YouTube is very particular. Yeah, so if I can, once I've remastered everything, I will definitely. But just check it out on Spotify. If you listen on Apple, give me a review. But it is pretty much wherever you listen to podcasts at the moment.
Oh, well, and your podcast is what's it actually called?
It's called On a Southern Beach: The Mysterious Case of the Sommerton Man.
Right. Right. And when is your episode 2 going live to air?
Episode 2 is dropping this coming Tuesday. So the general pattern of release is once every fortnight, just to give me a bit of breathing space to do the damn thing. So episode 2 will be up this Tuesday, this coming
Right.
Tuesday.
And for those in the Northern Hemisphere, that's Monday morning.
Yeah.
The night or
Yes.
the night, Tuesday night. Yeah, Monday morning or Monday.
Monday
No,
morning.
Tuesday morning. Yes, that's early in the morning for you guys in the Northern Hemisphere. 13 and a half hours to 15 and a half hours behind us.
Oh, I'll catch up. You look.
Yes, I know. We're ahead in everything but what counts. Okay. Can you? Oh. Now, are you planning on? I think we briefly touched on this, or was this before we went to air? Are you planning on doing, obviously, there's going to be a finite number of Summerton Man episodes. Are you planning on doing anything beyond, or is there going to be a finite number of Summerton Man? Is your podcast just going to be Summerton Man forever and ever and ever?
Probably not forever and ever and ever, but I definitely, so there's going to be 6 main episodes that just tackle the story. And then I'll be doing some bonus stuff. I hope to interview, Professor Abbott at some point. We'll look more into Rachel Egan and her story. Basically, I'll keep doing Sommerton Man material until there's just no more left to do. What I'm really conscious of is the fact that because this is such a well-known story, I don't want to get derivative. I don't want to get repetitive. It's very easy to just slip into doing things that other people have done before, and that's not particularly interesting, and it's not interesting to the listener, because they can just go listen to something else that, one of the 20 million other podcasts that have done this. So as long as there's refreshing, interesting content I can do, I will do it. But hopefully I will be moving on soonish. But yeah, it won't be forever Summerton Man. It'll be other things down the pipeline, yeah.
Oh, okay.
But for now, it's definitely this story.
Awesome. And I want to thank you so much for joining me on my live today. It's been an absolute privilege.
Yeah.
And a pleasure. And I really want to have you back, like maybe before episode 6, maybe between episode 5 and 6, the culmination of the Summerton Man. So don't forget, tune in Tuesday night. Check out the Facebook page, the Instagram. Listen to the entire episode of episode 1, the introduction, if you want to hear that, because I did cut some parts out of it. Not many, but a few. So, yeah. And thank you. Any last words? Oh, gosh, I shouldn't have asked that. This could go on forever.
That's cute. I know that's my...
Okay, awesome. Well, thank you, everyone. You have a wonderful day. Have 5-minute break. Go grab yourselves a coffee or a drink. I've got a premiere starting in 5 minutes. Right. And I farted in this one. Right. Watch out for it. Okay, bye, everyone. Thanks.